How does Israel restrict its media from reporting on the Iran conflict? The Israeli government has issued new directives restricting how its media covers its current war with Iran. On Wednesday, a circular from Israel's military censor, Brigadier General Kobi Mandelblit, announced new rules on what Israeli media organizations and journalists within the country can, and cannot, publish about the effect of Iranian strikes. The legal underpinnings of censorship in Israel are older than the country itself. Restrictions on media freedom in the territory were first established by the British during their mandate for Palestine in 1945, before being incorporated into Israeli law after the state was created 3 years later. However, restrictions on press freedom in Israel go further than just outlawing aspects of journalists' reporting. According to figures from the International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, Israel has killed at least 164 journalists in Gaza since October 7, 2023. More have been killed in Lebanon, the occupied West Bank and, now, Iran. Since May 2024, the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from its territory and, since November, has sanctioned the Israeli liberal daily, Haaretz, over coverage considered critical of its actions. So, what are the new restrictions on journalists and how does media freedom in Israel stack up against that in other countries? What do the new restrictions involve? The new regulations relate specifically to the conflict with Iran. They place special restrictions on the way journalists and editors can report the impact of Iranian strikes on Israel. In a circular, published on Wednesday, titled Rising Lion, IDF Censor Guidelines for Media Coverage of Attack on the Israeli Home Front, the Office of Israel's Chief Military Censor ordered editors to take strict measures when reporting on missile and drone attacks. The censor is also warning against reporting anything that could indicate attack positions or air defense operations, or damage assessments that could assist the enemy and pose a tangible threat to state security. Specifically, journalists and editors are prohibited from filming or broadcasting images from impact sites, particularly near military installations, using drones or wide-angle cameras to show impact areas, detailing the precise location of affected areas near security installations, broadcasting images of Israeli missiles being launched or of Iranian missiles being intercepted. The directive also bans the sharing of videos from social media without prior review by the censor, cautioning, as a side note, that some may be enemy-generated fake news. The new restrictions have taken immediate effect. Photographers in the port city of Haifa were arrested in the early hours of Tuesday morning while setting up cameras to capture images of potential strikes on the port. What restrictions were already in place before this? Journalists and editors were already required to submit any article that could touch upon Israel's security to the military censor for approval ahead of publication. Under the existing regulations, the censor has the power to halt publication of any article if there is a near certainty that real damage will be caused to the security of the state by its publication. It may not, however, restrict articles or reports on the grounds that they might damage the reputation of either the Israeli army or the country's politicians. In 2023, Israel's already tight restrictions were increased via an amendment to the country's anti-terrorism law which punishes those who systematically and continuously consume terrorist publications, or who broadcast a direct call to commit an act of terrorism. According to media freedom organizations, such as the Index on Censorship, even before the new restrictions on reporting the Iran conflict were introduced, the censor's definition of security issues was very broad, covering topics as diverse as the army, intelligence agencies, arms deals, administrative detainees, aspects of Israel's foreign affairs, and more. Any journalist, publication or media group can appeal a decision by the censor to the Supreme Court, which has the power to overturn its decisions. How often does the censor take action? In May, the Israeli-Palestinian magazine, Plus 972, described what it called an unprecedented spike in media censorship since the start of the war on Gaza. According to the magazine, throughout 2024, Israel's military censor fully blocked 1,635 articles from being published and imposed partial restrictions on another 6,265. This amounted to an average of roughly 21 interventions in news stories every day, more than twice the highest previous daily tally of about 10 interventions during the 2014 Gaza conflict, Operation Protective Edge, and more than 3 times that typically recorded during peacetime of 6.2 per day. How free is Israel's media compared with other, Western-style, democracies? None of the countries that Israeli leaders typically compare themselves with has any institution comparable to Israel's military censor. According to the Reporters Sans Frontières, RSF, World Press Freedom Index, Israel currently stands at 112th place out of 180 countries for freedom of the press, below Haiti, Guinea-Bissau, South Sudan and Chad. According to the RSF, press freedom, media plurality and editorial independence have been increasingly restricted in Israel since the start of the war in Gaza, launched by Israel on the 7th of October 2023 following the deadly Hamas attack. RSF also noted the importance given to political connections in choosing the leadership of Israel's broadcasting regulatory bodies and that only firmly pro-government networks, such as Israel's Channel 14, are generally selected to host interviews with senior figures. Escalate to de-escalate. What options does Iran have to end Israel war? Iran has no clear off-ramps to end its war with Israel, which could soon drag in the United States and lead to a new quagmire in the Middle East, analysts told Al Jazeera. Since June 13, Israel has killed at least 240 Iranians, many of them civilians. Top Iranian military leaders and nuclear scientists have been among the dead. Israel has struck Iran's state television station, hit a hospital, targeted apartment blocks, and damaged the country's air defenses. In response, Iran has fired barrages of ballistic missiles at Israel, targeting military and security installations, and hitting the Haifa oil refinery, residential buildings, and a hospital. At least 24 people have been killed in Israel as a result of the attacks. Israel aims to destroy Iran's nuclear program and potentially go as far as bringing about regime change, analysts say. These goals make it difficult for Iran to navigate a quick end to the conflict. Iran's official position is that it will not negotiate while under attack, fearing it will be forced to fully surrender to US and Israeli terms. Iran may instead have to hope that US President Donald Trump can be persuaded to reign in Israel, which may be in his interest to avoid getting entangled in a faraway war, even if the US leader has recently appeared to favor striking Iran, and has reiterated that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. If the United States recognizes the urgency of de-escalation and manages to persuade Israel to halt its military campaign, then, given the mounting costs of war for Iran and the fact that Iran's primary goal is to stop, not expand, the conflict, it is highly likely that Iran would agree to a ceasefire or political resolution, said Hamid Reza Aziz, an expert on Iran for the Middle East Council for Global Affairs think tank. Few viable options. In theory, Iran could return to the negotiating table and sign a deal while under fire. However, Iran would be forced to entirely give up its nuclear program, enabling its enemies to then aggressively pursue regime change without fear of consequence, analysts previously told Al Jazeera. This is an unlikely scenario, according to Reza H. Akbari, an analyst on Iran and the Middle East, North Africa and South Asia program manager at the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. Iran's nuclear program continues to remain a leverage for Iran, which enables them to even engage with the US. Giving it up would be a shocking development which I don't foresee for the time being, he told Al Jazeera. The US and Iran had already engaged in 5 rounds of negotiations before Israel instigated the conflict. The two sides had reached an impasse when Trump demanded that Iran give up its entire nuclear program, which every country has an inalienable right to use for peaceful purposes, according to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which Iran is a signatory to. Trump has since warned Iran to quickly surrender to a deal or face even more dire repercussions, hinting at regime change. Iran has few good options, said Nega Mortazavi, an expert on Iran with the Center for International Policy, CIP. She believes Iran has little to lose by retaliating against Israel, but also notes that the strategy would not necessarily give Tehran a way out of the conflict. If Iran does not retaliate after each attack, Iranian officials think the Israeli attacks will get harder, and I think they're correct, Mortazavi told Al Jazeera. But every time Iran retaliates, they give Israel the excuse to attack them again. Strategic calculus. Iran's formal position is to inflict significant political, military and material cost on Israel for instigating the war. This position was echoed by Hassan Ahmadian, an assistant professor at Tehran University, who suggested Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may stop the war if Israelis feel the impact of a crisis he instigated. Iranians are quite confident that they can inflict enough retaliatory pain to make Israel stop its attacks. Ahmadian told Al Jazeera, "It is unclear how much damage Iran is doing to Israel's military infrastructure since the latter bars the media from reporting such information. Furthermore, it's hard to assess how long Iran can sustain a war against Israel. But Israel itself may struggle to attack for a protracted period without the US," said Slavin. She referenced media reports that Israel is running low on defensive interceptors, which could make it more vulnerable to long-range strikes by Iran. The challenges facing both foes could prompt him to end the fighting sooner rather than later, at least that appears to be what Iran is betting on. Right now, Iran is trying to hunker down and somehow get through this, Slavin said. And that's it for today's news. Thanks for staying with us to the end. If you found this update helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you never miss a story that matters. We'll be back soon with more updates, insights, and stories that impact your life. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, and take care.